Every man who walked that property in the spring of 2009 came away with the same opinion. Dead ground. Hardpan clay all the way down, they said. No water table worth speaking of. Gullied on the west end, choked with hedge apple and wild plum on the east. The pasture itself, what was left of it, had that pale, ash-like look that comes when soil has been robbed past the point of easy repair. 12 men walked it over 3 weekends in March and early April. 12 men reached the same conclusion. Not one of them was the man who ended up buying it. That man was 16 years old. His name was Cody Brewer, and he stood 5'7" in his work boots, which were his grandfather's old Georgia boot pull-ons, a full size too large. He had $3,200 in a savings account at First National Bank of Lynn County, Kansas, and he had a notebook, a green Mead composition book, the cheap kind, with pages already warped from being carried in his back pocket through rain and sweat, and one particularly bad afternoon loading hay in a thunderstorm. That notebook is how this story ends the way it does. We'll get to the notebook, but first, the land. The Detweiler place sat on the southeast corner of a county road intersection, about 4 miles outside of Pleasanton, Kansas, Lynn County. It was 38 acres, which is not enough to be a real farm by anyone's current math, but is enough to be something if you know what you're doing. Harvey Detweiler had died in January of 2008 with no children and a nephew in Wichita who wanted nothing but the money. The nephew had priced it at $4,500 and dropped to $3,800 and then $3,500 over 14 months. By March of 2009, the sign out front said $3,000 firm. $3,000 for 38 acres sounds like the kind of number you'd see in a story set in 1943. It does not sound like a number from 2009. There was a reason for that. Phil Acker, who sold farm ground in Lynn County for 22 years and drove a white Chevrolet pickup with 180,000 miles on it, had walked the Detweiler place twice and told the nephew plainly that he wasn't going to be able to move it at any price above $2,800. That clay won't hold a blade of grass, he said, not without drainage work that'll cost you more than the land's worth. The nephew dropped the price to $3,000 and stopped taking Phil's calls. Phil, for his part, was not wrong about the clay. He was just wrong about what was underneath it. Stories about places like this don't get told much anymore. If you grew up around people who worked with their hands and didn't say much about it, hit subscribe. We're going to keep telling them as long as you keep watching. There is a man named Gordon Teague who was, in April of 2009, 63 years old and semi-retired from custom hay work and did most of his living on a small spread in Trading Post, Kansas. He knew Cody Brewer's grandfather, Earl, who had died 4 years earlier and left behind, among other things, that green composition notebook. Gordon had been at Earl's funeral. He had not thought about Earl Brewer much since then. On the second Saturday of April 2009, Gordon drove over to look at an old Massey Ferguson 135 a man was selling outside of Pleasanton, found it was already gone, and on his way home stopped at the intersection near the Detweiler place, because the sign had caught his eye. He walked the property for about 20 minutes. He was not looking to buy anything. He just looked. He told me later he almost didn't notice the boy. Cody Brewer had arrived 2 hours before Gordon. He had a long tape measure, the 300-foot kind on a yellow reel, and he was walking the low end of the property, the northwest corner where a shallow depression ran maybe 8 inches below grade, like someone had pressed a thumb into the earth a long time ago. He had a sharpened pencil behind his ear and the green notebook in his hand. He was measuring the depression, or something about it. Gordon watched him from the fence line and could not figure out what exactly the boy was doing. Cody moved slowly, the way a person moves when they are counting something very small. He would stop, look down, write something, Stop. Look down again. He wasn't looking at the clay. He was looking at what grew in it. Gordon walked over. Cody looked up. You looking at this piece? Gordon said. Yes, sir. Your dad with you? No, sir. Gordon looked at the notebook. Cody did not close it. What are you writing down? Gordon said. Cody turned the notebook so Gordon could see. There were measurements, distances in feet, a hand-drawn topographic sketch roughed in pencil, some notation Gordon couldn't quite read. There was a column of plant names down the left margin. Cattail sedge, blue flag iris, sneezeweed, fox sedge. Gordon had been around farm ground his whole life, and he knew what those plants had in common. He did not say anything for a moment. Where'd you learn to look for that? Gordon said. Cody said, My grandfather. Earl Brewer had been a groundwater man. Not by profession, he had worked all his life on his own 80-acre spread in Bourbon County, but by what you might call obsession. He had grown up watching his own father lose a crop 3 years running to a dry summer. And he had decided at around age 14 that he was going to understand water the way a mechanic understands an engine, from the inside out. He started keeping notes in his early 20s. The notebooks went for decades. When he died, there were 11 of them in a box in his closet, each one a Green Mead composition book, and the family had debated throwing them away because they looked like nothing, and weighed almost nothing, and had no obvious cash value. Cody's mother had kept them in a plastic tote in the garage. Cody had found them when he was 13. He had read all 11. It took him about 8 months, and it was not easy reading. His grandfather wrote in a compressed, shorthand style. Abbreviations that weren't abbreviations so much as private code developed over 40 years. Cody had to work backwards from later notebooks, where the code was used consistently, to figure out what certain symbols and marginal notations meant. There were sections he could not crack at all, but the main body of the notebooks, the observations, the methods, the conclusions, came through. Earl Brewer had spent 4 decades studying how plants tell you where water lives. Not the obvious stuff like cottonwoods along a creek, the subtle stuff. He had a theory about blue flag iris, specifically, that the plant would only establish in soil where subsurface moisture sat reliably within 6 feet of grade even in drought years. He had tested this theory on 14 different properties over 30 years. He believed it held. He had never written it down for anyone else. He had just written it down. Cody Brewer had read the same page about blue flag iris 17 times. He was not sure it was right. He was not sure about any of it. Not really. But in the northwest corner of the Detweiler place, in that shallow depression that all 12 previous visitors had noted only as a drainage problem, there was a stand of blue flag iris about 20 feet across. There was also a patch of what Cody had identified as fox sedge, and along the very edge of the depression, 3 small cattail sedge plants that had no business growing in hardpan clay unless something underneath was feeding them. He was 16. He had $3,200. The land was $3,000. He didn't have a way to verify any of it beyond his grandfather's notes and his own eyes. He knew there was a possibility he was wrong. He knew that possibility was real and not small. He told me he spent about 3 full nights lying awake in his bedroom, doing what he called the math of being wrong, which was that he would lose $3,000, which was every dollar he had, and he would have a 38-acre piece of hardpan in Lynn County that he couldn't use and probably couldn't sell. That was the bad outcome. He could see it clearly. He could describe it. He bought the property on April 18, 2009. He was 16 years and 4 months old. The realtor who handled the closing, a woman named Diane Pratt who worked out of a small office in Mound City, said later that Cody sat at the table and signed every document with the same expression, which was no particular expression at all. His mother co-signed as required because of his age. She had not argued him out of it, which surprised people who knew her. She had read 2 of the notebooks herself, she said, once Cody explained what he was looking for. She was not certain either. But she knew her own father's handwriting, and she knew the care behind it. The blue flag iris didn't lie. Cody hired a well driller named Mark Sondrup out of Fort Scott, Kansas, to come bore a test hole in the northwest corner of the property in June of 2009. Sondrup had drilled in Linn County for 19 years and had come up dry on that same general ridge more than once. He told Cody, not unkindly, that he might want to reconsider where he was drilling. Cody showed him the iris stand. Sondrup said that was interesting, but he'd seen iris in dry ground before. Cody showed him the fox sedge and the cattail sedge and the sketch in the notebook and the column of observations from a property in Bourbon County his grandfather had documented in 1987 with the same plant combination. Sondrup looked at it all for a while. "All right," Sondrup said. "Your money." They hit water at 38 feet, not a trickle. A true water table, consistent and cold, sitting at 38 feet and showing 14 gallons per minute on the pump test. Sondrup had been drilling in Linn County for 19 years. He stood there looking at the gauge for a long time without saying anything. He doesn't remember why it took him so long. He just felt like he ought to look at it a while. What a consistent 14-gallon-per-minute water source means for 38 acres of otherwise marginal ground requires a little arithmetic, and the arithmetic matters here. You can irrigate roughly an acre per gallon per minute as a working rule for row crop or intensive forage. 14 gallons per minute on a property that size, managed right, means you can water the whole piece. It means the hardpan clay, which is a problem in dry conditions and no problem at all when you have irrigation, becomes a soil you can amend. It means the $3,000 piece of ground that no grown man in Linn County wanted in April of 2009 had just become something else entirely. Cody spent the summer of 2009 doing what he could with what he had, which was not much. He was 16, then 17. He tilled a test strip along the northeast fence line, about 3 acres, and put it in a Sudan sorghum hybrid mix to begin breaking up the hardpan and building organic matter back into the top horizon. He hauled in 4 loads of composted cattle manure from a feedlot east of Pleasanton at $18 a load, $72 total, and worked it in with a borrowed farmhand rotary tiller on the back of a neighbor's old Case 970. He seeded fescue on the gullied west end to start holding what soil was left there. None of this was fast. None of it was supposed to be. By 2011, he had the first cutting of Bermuda grass off the irrigated east section, 14 acres, solid stand, 2 cuttings that summer at about 8 tons per acre per cutting. He sold it as horse hay at $110 a ton through a hay broker in Overbrook, Kansas. He was 18 years old. The gross on that first hay year was a little over $8,600. His total cost in on the property, including the water well and development and everything else, was just under $9,400. He was not yet whole, but he could see it from there. He is 32 now. He farms 190 acres in Linn County, 38 of which are the Detweiler place he bought for $3,000. He has drilled 3 additional wells on ground he has since purchased, each time using the same plant indicator system out of his grandfather's notebooks. 2 of the 3 found water at depth. 1 was dry. He doesn't consider that a failure. His grandfather's notes included a page that said, in part, "The plants are evidence, not proof. Treat them that way." Cody has that page memorized. He runs a small cow-calf operation alongside the hay ground. about 34 head of Angus Cross, and custom grazes for 2 neighboring producers in the dry months. He sits on the Soil and Water Conservation Board in Lynn County. The 11 green Mead notebooks are in a fireproof box in his shop. Gordon Teague, who watched a 16-year-old boy pace out a depression in dead ground in April of 2009 and could not figure out what he was doing, drove back by the property in the summer of 2012. There was a hay barn on the east end that hadn't been there. There was a center pivot irrigation setup on the back half. The pasture was green in July, which in Lynn County in a dry year means something is feeding it. Gordon sat at that intersection for a while with his window down. He had been buying and selling farm ground in and around that county for most of his adult life, and he had walked the Detweiler place the same as everyone else and seen what everyone else had seen. He told me he felt, sitting there in 2012, something that was not quite jealousy and not quite pride. Closer to the second one, he said. And he wasn't even sure why. Maybe because the boy who figured it out had been reading an old man's notebooks. And there is something in that. The knowledge outlasting the man who held it, finding its way into younger hands across 4 years of a kid sitting at a kitchen table with pages that looked like nothing, that is worth sitting with for a while. Earl Brewer spent 40 years watching how the ground tells the truth about itself, writing it all down in 11 cheap composition books, not knowing who would read them or whether it would matter. He died in 2005, having never sold a piece of ground he didn't own and never drilled a well he didn't need. His grandson paid $3.00 for 38 acres of hard-pan clay and found a water table at 38 feet, because a stand of blue flag iris doesn't grow where water isn't. Not famous, not wealthy, just steady, careful, and quiet. And right about the iris,